Welcome, Notre Dame fans, to another edition of Irish Illustrated Insider. It is Thursday, April 10th. We are 2 days away from the annual Blue Gold game in Notre Dame Stadium. I'm Tim Priester with Drew Mentak of Irish Illustrated, John Bryce Football Scoop, and Irish Illustrated, and we're previewing the Blue Gold game. If we had turned record on a minute ago, you would have heard us talking about, boy, this is probably not going to be real pretty with the offensive lines in bad shape, key personnel missing everywhere. And this is why Marcus Freeman has said that it will be, there's no draft. There aren't enough players to do that. And this is a product of the long football season and injuries and being cautious, et cetera, et cetera. So, with that bright news, gentlemen, what are you looking for this weekend for the annual Blue Gold game?
Go ahead, Drew.
Um, yeah, I mean it's definitely going to be tough to glean much from this weekend, just given kind of the chaos and everything you just described. So I think, I mean, it's always good to get another look at some of the younger players, especially the early enrollees. Guy and freshmen last year we didn't get to see um, much opportunities for. So I think it's always good to see people are getting excited about Tay Johnson and guys like that, and people we've described in practice. So I think it's good that fans will also get to see that for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's going to be seeing individuals, and even if it's individual drills early in the warm-ups and things of that nature, can we see some individuals make plays? Because Notre Dame has a number of noteworthy individuals still on this roster, and that's a KK Smith, that's a Cam Williams. Does he show that he's making some of the strides that we've heard about, especially after the performance last Saturday? What do we see on the defensive side of the ball? Do we get some good one-on-one matchups with Devontae Smith and somebody, or even a Leonard Moore? Just because Leonard Moore talked to Drew and I about his improved and increased upper body strength and how much he wants to make it tougher for DBs, or excuse me, for wide receivers to have to go through him. So I still think there are some moments Saturday that can show the talent that remains on this Notre Dame roster. I can't imagine we'll see Jeremiah Love do anything.
Yeah.
I imagine it would be incredibly minimal for a Jadarian Price. So, we've talked about Kedron Young being an absolute horse, and he's going to need all of that horsepower behind this offensive line. So maybe we'll get to see Kedron Young truck somebody on Saturday. Let's just hope it's not 3 yards in the backfield. And then the last thing I would say is that you kind of better get used to some elements of this Saturday's blue and gold game, because I believe it will far more resemble what we see more of in the future, just in talking with coaches around the sport and general managers and others over the past really 6 weeks now, I guess, since the onset of spring camps around college football. There's talk of going to OTAs. There's talk of it just being much more glorified individual workouts and some very minimal one-on-one drills and things like that, with the expected roster reduction down to 105, whether that happens immediately or does get grandfathered in, as is now being discussed. Still, the modifications in this year's spring game at Notre Dame and a bunch of places are going to become far more commonplace moving forward.
Yeah, I think we'd all like to see Kedron Young running behind, and I mean, I get you can put the best of your best together on one line and probably and still get some productivity, but I don't think that it's an accident that the scrimmage the other day was number one, won by the defense, and number two, I think we came out of that practice session with more defensive names to talk about than offensive names because the D line was winning at the point of attack. And then on the back end, we saw some young guys in the secondary that, I think are really, really interesting. Tay Johnson, I don't want to overplay it because of one scrimmage that we saw, but when you hear and read the comments made by Marcus Freeman about Tay Johnson, I mean, he said he's had a good spring. And remember, guys, that press conference started out the other day, Saturday, where Marcus Freeman didn't really seem to want to say a whole lot about anybody, and then we kept prying a little bit and getting a little bit more specific, and he said some good things about guys, and one of those was Tay Johnson, but we saw some good things with Carson Hobbs. Cree Thomas is a guy that we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks. So, yeah, I look, It's certainly not discouraging anybody from coming to attend a Mecca, a journey to Notre Dame with the temperatures in the upper 50s on Saturday, no rain, mostly sunshine. Be a great day to be in Notre Dame Stadium. I just don't know that the play on the field is going to match that. And if the trade-off is a deep run into January versus a poorly constructed blue gold game, I think we'll take that
That's a
101 out of 100 times.
that's a very eloquent way of putting it, TP. I like that. I would say another guy I'm excited to see on Saturday is Jason Onye because we know that there were times he thought, and we all thought, he would never play another snap inside Notre Dame Stadium. So I think that's significant. And then for everyone who's been dying to check out the quarterbacks and see what we haven't seen or have seen, Saturday is that chance. You've got three guys battling for the job. You get to see them Saturday under various circumstances, and all three have been in this program for more than a year. That's significant to me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I guess, kind of along those lines is like because it's a different structure and things like that. I think there's always a tendency because that's the only time you get to see people in the spring, or at least the rest of the fans. Um, that you can overreact a little bit. And this, I think, just like come in and be ready to, I guess, enjoy what you see and look for young guys and take it from that perspective rather than like, oh, this is who's going to win the job because they performed well on this day in these kind of different circumstances. Like it's not even as competitive maybe as what you're used to seeing on the blue and gold game potentially.
It's difficult because like for example, we came away, and I know people have said there were different impressions depending upon the various sites as to how the quarterbacks played. Um, and I mean I totally get that, but I think like we form an opinion based upon what we think we saw, but you have to put that in perspective because that doesn't mean that it's gone that way the entire spring. And obviously the players and coaches have seen infinitely more, and maybe somebody that we didn't necessarily like the way he performed on Saturday at quarterback has been the guy that's been the standout the whole time. That's why, Mike Denbrock's like, I'll answer any question you have about the offense except about the quarterbacks. And so I get that. But yeah, there's no doubt there's a lot of young guys that were very interested in seeing. And JB, you mentioned Cam Williams. Cam Williams, these moments are huge, and that's why every opportunity he has to catch a pass, he needs to hold on to it and build upon that. But you
Elijah
know,
Burris, yeah, just
Yeah, Elijah
to get
Burris.
another name out there that supremely impressed last Saturday again. I know he did have a terrible drop, but I was really impressed that the very next target, which was either one snap or two snaps later, he made the catch, secured the ball, and then cut up field and got a little bit of extra after that. That shows some mental toughness.
Yeah, I don't know that we see Jordan Faison. There's a lacrosse game at 5 that day. The blue gold, by the way, the blue gold game kickoff is scheduled for 2 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time for those that are traveling. Oh, well, it's on Peacock as well, correct? So, obviously people will want to tune in to. Hope we haven't put too much of a damper on it. But hey, we've got a bunch of questions. Drew, you want to add about any other young guys? Because um, who else? I mean, who else you looking forward to seeing? Micah Gilbert's another one that we won't see, I don't imagine, because he suffered the broken fingers early in spring drills.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like even some of the guys you saw a little bit of last year, like I feel like Kennedy Urlacher's made some strides. I feel like he's pretty fun to see in live action. I mean, they'll be able to hit a little more even than what we saw potentially on last Saturday too. So I feel like even some of the guys that you saw briefly when they were in blowouts last year, getting a shot to see their development is always interesting. Maybe some other younger linebackers emerge. I mean, Madden Framo is a guy that most people are excited about for good reason, and there's even some of those other guys who um, maybe weren't as heralded as recruits that also have some interesting potential in terms of their skill sets.
Yeah,
Like,
I think there's some young guy, a couple early entry guys, two safeties, Jadon Blair, who's impressive physically when you see him in person, his length, and Ethan Long, I think he's impressed as well. You've got, and I don't know how much Jared Dawson plays, but JB, don't you? I mean, I think this would be a great opportunity for a guy like Elijah Hughes to get a ton of reps, who, unfortunately, kind of quote wasted 2 years of eligibility at USC. He played in 8 games each season, but they didn't count on him at real crunch time. So that's a guy that needs
Yeah,
reps, man. He needs not
yeah,
live reps, and so he'll have an opportunity against probably going against some young guys. We're going to see Cam Herron at center. Center position is a little bit up in the air right now, but yeah, I mean, look, still looking forward to seeing a lot of these early entry guys and the guys that, Nolan James. We didn't get much of a chance to actually see him Saturday.
yeah. And Nolan's I'll be curious to see the message board reaction to Nolan James because he's certainly the smallest in the Notre Dame backfield, and I think that will sort of stick out in a hurry. I would say, hey, look, a guy probably can't win, say, the safety position on Saturday, but he could probably lose it if he played terribly enough. And I think it's been a very compelling, exciting competition between Luke Talich and Johnson there opposite Adon Schuler for that other safety spot, and there's good safety depth. I think people will like seeing the depth and talent and length of the Notre Dame secondary. Notre Dame has gotten so much longer than it was just 4 or 5 years ago when they didn't have the guys that could physically match up with the larger wide receivers, no matter how gifted they were, no matter how technique sound they were, they just weren't long enough. And Notre Dame is a lot longer in the secondary now. From an Ethan Long to whomever, I think they'll see that.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I mean, obviously you don't want to lose a guy like Xavier Watts, but you're talking about a guy who's 5'11", and while I don't expect anyone to replace his production this year, like you're talking about replacing with guys who are 6'3", 6'4", and arguably more athletic too. So it's exciting from that perspective and kind of seeing what Notre Dame can do with those type of pieces at the back end.
Yeah, Talich is 6'4", 217. He played high school quarterback. He's the son of a coach. So there's a lot of physical traits there, football IQ there, and then Johnson is just sort of surging. So I love some of these matchups within the game Saturday.
I love to see the length at safety. Kyle Hamilton played so well with it, and that's one of the things that makes Xavier Watts as impressive as he is because I mean, you don't really think of him as an undersized safety per se, but was he listed at 5'11", Drew?
I think 5'11 and a half maybe, or
I'm buying
Yeah.
it, measured in.
He did not play like he was a little bit undersized at that position, but he was obviously a great player with good things ahead of him in the NFL, but you do like that length coming in at the safety position. Looking to upgrade your wardrobe, founded by ND alum Go Wang, you've seen ESQ's custom clothing on the player walk and all of your favorite players and coaches. With over a decade of making the best bespoke clothing available, ESQ will help you look and feel your best. From a perfect fitting suit or sport coat, shirt or bomber jacket, or that perfect tuxedo for wedding season, check out esqclothing.com and book an appointment to upgrade your wardrobe today. Mention Irish Illustrated and get 10% off your entire purchase. That's esqclothing.com. Segment 2 coming up, burning up the boards. Segment 2, burning up the boards, starts with a question from the Linebacker Lounge. On the heels of a tremendous title game run, Notre Dame has shown that they are committed to being a serious player in the NIL space and transfer portal. They have paid top dollar for coordinators and coaches. They have broken ground on a state-of-the-art training facility. They have an AD who has publicly stated he's maniacally obsessed with winning a national championship in football. Is there anything else that Marcus Freeman can ask for to further improve the program?
no, not. There's nothing glaring.
Nothing major like a new
Right.
facility or
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's been overdue. Also, not in the question, but of note is look, Notre Dame has gotten a couple of non-graduate transfers in recent years. That's significant. That's one of the things that was an earlier ask of Marcus Freeman in the football program. So they don't have the largest staff in college football. They're just no longer basically the smallest staff of major college football players. And I mean that from the personnel department to whatever. We saw them add Myron Tungavaloa Mosa recently. That's a nice addition for them off the field. And we know they added Mike Martin in a true GM position. Then they added a director of recruiting, and they retained Carter Allman and Dylan McCullough too, and Becca Seitz. And so That department has grown, and they were one of the first to publicly go into the analytics realm last summer and hire Anthony Tresh as director of analytics, which was a big move because of note, as we reported last week at Football Scoop, USC hired a director of analytics, and that's the first in that program's history. So Notre Dame has invested a ton to give Marcus Freeman and company the best path possible to a national championship. So that's a long answer to say, really, no, you're never going to find a football coach who says he has every single thing in the world. But the one thing, and I say this fairly tongue in cheek, yeah, the one thing he could ask for is for Indiana to suddenly become a true hotbed of football talent. Yes, Notre Dame's going to always recruit nationally, if not globally, but it sure be nice if a few more of those trees popped up in your backyard.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all what you both said, and I think they've come a long way in the last few years. I think the biggest thing is we're still in this period where college football is kind of rapidly changing and kind of how rules work. And I think the biggest thing I'm sure Marcus Freeman is probably wanting to make the administration aware is that like things they still need to be adapting and kind of be willing to be agile and kind of see where they're going to need to adjust in the near future after, well, I know we'll discuss this a little later, but like revenue sharing comes in and just any other potential rule changes and stuff like that. Like this isn't necessarily good enough because we don't even know what things are going to look like in 2 or 3 years. So don't think like, okay, we've done this, now we're good for a while. Like it's kind of a rapidly evolving sport. So
Yeah, and I know Pete Bavacqua will have an eye on all those kind of things. Certainly the addition when Chad Bowden left, Notre Dame needed to replace him and then, kind of replenish and add to what they had in his department. I think, Mike Martin's diverse background is going to really come in handy. So that was taken care of. I don't know. I mean, is the indoor practice facility getting is it too old now and outdated? Do they need another one yet? I think they're still in pretty good shape there. And John, you mentioned things like, the academic part of it and the non-grad transfers or the underclassmen. I think that's always going to be a tough sell, but as long as the school's a little bit more open-minded, a little bit flexible about that, I think Marcus Freeman can live with that. I put these two questions together, guys, so bear with me. It's a little bit long. From CP11, in your opinion, are there still carries for Jabron Payne this year? He's older, coming off significant injury, and his one job, short yardage back, seems that it can be done as effectively or better by at least a couple backs in the room like Jeremiah Love and Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams. Do you see him on the roster next week? And then tied in with that from Judge Arthur Vandelay, is there a role for Kedron Young on the 2025 team? He was impressive in limited action last season and seems to have a skill set that is different from the other three, but there are only so many carries to go around. We know Jaywan Sider has said, going much deeper than three backs, maybe four in a game, but I mean, pretty much three going into the game. It's hard to get more than those guys. And I have an opinion about what I think is going to happen here. You guys jump in on that.
yeah, I think
Well,
so. Went into like it's hard to prepare more than four for a game throughout the week too. I think he's like four you can get ready, but the other guys in the roster won't get the amount of work and preparation you need to rely on them necessarily that Saturday. So I think you're right. It's going to be between those two backs on who would potentially get that four spot and get the work. And I mean, I think it would probably be more encouraging for the long-term future of the program if that's Kedron Young, given that he did the posters right. Like that is somebody who has a different skill set and is a highly recruited guy and somebody who, if he clicks, could definitely add to what that room can do in a way that I'm not sure Payne can.
yeah, I would say, and that's a good combo of questions, and of course, I love the Judge Arthur Vandelay, say Vandelay Industries. I would say those are two good questions, and it's impossible to think that Notre Dame's running back room as it exists going into this blue and gold game exists with that sort of intact nature when the Irish open preseason camp in late July. I just don't see it happening. And you make a good point, Drew, in terms of Jabron Payne versus Kedron Young. Kedron Young was a consensus top 75 prospect, no matter which service you looked at, basically. And he was a consensus 4-star, and he's just got some physical attributes that make he's the type of guy that teams will tamper to try and get into the portal. Jabron Payne is the type of guy that will have a home with a number of teams if he goes into the portal, and there's a difference there. And so I think Kedron Young has more upside, but I would not discount Jabron Payne and certainly respect him. He's in a lot of ways right now this year's Devin Ford, because he has been so selfless and he has accepted any role. How long can he continue to accept that role? Let's not forget that Dylan McCullough, his former position coach, was really tight with Jabron Payne's grandfather. And that was a huge part, a huge nucleus of that relationship. And I think DMAC had always told Payne's family, I'll always take care of your son. And that's how he ended up so instantly coming from Indiana to Notre Dame, and then still, earning that trust to have defined roles with him. So Sider has made his comments on how he views the room, and it's just hard to see Jabron Payne, in my opinion, having a real role on this team in the fall.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think the key point, both of you have mentioned it, that Kedron Young is younger. He has 4 years of eligibility, and he does have higher upside than Payne. I don't like to sit here and say so and so is going to leave at the end of the spring, but I just think that I think Payne could look at that situation, and he feels like he can play a significant role somewhere else, and so one of those guys is the odd man out, and I think most Notre Dame people would vote that Kedron Young sticks around. So you're going to have to minister to him a little bit here moving forward. And so there's going to be movement. I mean, after Saturday, there is going to be movement. And somebody like Jabron Payne, who has a good upside, could go somewhere else and play.
Yeah, and I just want to add that it is tamper season. Like maybe it's not official tampering because so many of these guys, virtually every player on every scholarship player on every power conference program has some sort of de facto representation. If it's not an official agency rep or NIL rep, it's somebody who's his de facto rep. And so it's happening now. There are roster offers being made right now. I know this with certainty. There's people trying to get offensive tackles into the portal for 1.5 million. That's one of the bigger numbers. Defensive linemen are in a priority, and around that 1 million range. They can go over 1 million if they're deemed an immediate starter and difference maker. We know what the marketplace has been at the quarterback position. We know that the running back position is huge. I mean, there have still been teams that have tried to float insane offers toward Jeremiah Love's people this spring. So it's out there. So we think we've got a handle on it. We think we know who it makes sense. Oh, I can see why he would go into the portal because there's such a logjam here. Somebody somewhere, whether it's Notre Dame or otherwise, will have a completely unexpected portal entry between April 16th and 25th because the money out there is so insane.
Well, that leads us into the next question, which I'm going to throw to you, JB, first, and that is from BL Casper. And so no ruling on the house settlement. Is there a next date for something to actually happen? And we've been talking about the $20.5 million and setting that number, which would, hopefully help settle down some of this 1.5 million for defensive tackles that really don't deserve 1.5 million, and just add a little bit of sense to the process. But JB, what's the latest on that?
Yeah, and I would add as a little bit more nuanced information there. That's why the basketball portal this spring, right now, is as chaotic as it has ever been. There was a player who last week was not a first conference All Big Ten player who left and signed for 1.75 million. 1.75 million. And he's a really, really good player, but I think he might have been third team all conference and now going to an SEC team for a way, way higher sum than that. So, and then also that's why these deals are so crazy in all the sports. Football is going to be that way in this next portal window because people know there are no guardrails there's no even remote appearance of guardrails right now. So the numbers are crazy because this is the last dash gasp to get as much as you can possibly get before there's an attempt at guardrails. In talking with power conference ADs, group of five GMs, general managers from power conference teams, and coaches around the sport, the consensus is it moved really close to being passed this week in Judge Claudia Wilkins' Oakland courtroom. And she pretty much said, I'm not going to rule on this today from the bench, but I'll be ruling on this in the next couple of weeks. Both sides expect it to pass. The optimism is that it will be passed by the end of this month. And it could happen before that. I want to stress that. We could know as soon as next week that it is officially being passed. But the optimism is that it would be passed and start to be uh, in the beginning stages of being enacted by the end of April. Everybody's targeting July 1st. That's the day you can begin the revenue share. There's more and more people around the sport and around college athletics. And by people, I mean institutions who have opted into the revenue share. Again, there's differing levels of that, but the max in year one is around 20.4, 20.5 million, and then guaranteed to go up by 4% the next couple of years. And then I think it can be revisited in 3 years. But that's the expectation, is that it's passed and passed by the end of this month.
Yeah, and I would defer to you on this, John, because you've been following a lot closer than I have. But it sounds like the judge also wanted them to maybe make some tweaks after Monday in terms of like, should you grandfather in current roster players on the roster so they get an exception for that 105 roster limit and stuff like that, which I think um, just even talking to the Notre Dame players would be a welcome change as you kind of progressively work towards what you want it to look like rather than just kind of making these radical changes that kind of affect the fringe guys more than people anyway. So I think that's a welcome change if they can kind of come to an agreement on that.
That makes the most sense, right, JB? I
Yeah,
mean, you've got to have some level of ease into this, and grandfathering those players into it would be
yeah, and there's
a
precedence
way.
for it, TP. Great point by both of you. There's precedence for it because of the way that COVID was handled, frankly. And so we've seen roster expansion during COVID because of that. And so you would like to see a more gradual easing into it. I had a college coach this week ask me, he goes, look, I get all the revenue share stuff. And he was like, but please explain to me why they want to cap our rosters like this. And I said, well, that's also part of revenue share. I was like, even if those extra 15 players from 105 to 120 aren't your big earners or aren't even going to get revenue share, they still cost a lot of money to equip, and they still cost a lot of money to feed and have a part of your program and have on your roster and to provide medical insurance for and all of those things. And so the aim to cut down roster sizes is rooted in economics, just like every bit of this. So I do hope that they find a way to gradually phase that out, whether they try to get it at 115 this year and then 105 by next year, or however they do it. But I was going to say Saturday inside Notre Dame Stadium for the blue and gold game, you're going to see some guys playing with tremendous effort because they're very cognizant that 105 right now is a very real thing.
Our next question is from Phila Fell. If the interior defensive line has shown good progress this spring and quarterback looks to remain in open competition, what is the third most important thing that needs to be developed heading into the summer? So what position group after those two comes to mind for you guys? Drew?
I mean, I think it's something we've touched on a little bit, but I still think it's even though you're really only replacing one starter in the secondary, I think feeling even more confident with what Christian Gray can do after some of his ups and downs last year, and you're still replacing the most important player, arguably on the defense from last year at the safety spot, and there's several options there, including Jalen Stroman, who we haven't really been able to see this spring as he recovers from his shoulder operation. So I think getting more comfortable, Notre Dame developing and getting more comfortable with those other options. And also, I know we've been high on Devonta Smith, but we saw last year that you need some of those depth pieces because you never know who's going to get hurt. And last year, Notre Dame made its playoff run because they had guys to replace the people who went down. So I think that presumably under Coach Ash will still be the, vital piece of this, highly effective pass defense. And I think that would be the third most important thing.
Yeah, for me, it's probably twofold, and you can't do anything about either one right now because it's two positions impacted so significantly by injury. But it's your offensive line, particularly if you're keeping a mill at right tackle, then you still have some question marks at left tackle, as we discussed on Monday or after the scrimmage last Saturday, whether that's keeping Jagasaw inside, which appears to be the inclination. How long before Knapp is full go? Does Gerby Lambert get back in time late July to challenge him? Could he have challenged him, or was he potentially challenging him before he suffered this injury on to his shoulder late in spring camp? So for me, it's the offensive line and it's the edge position. We're seeing them rush KVA more off the edge. I think there's some enticing components to that. Bryce Young looks poised, as Drew has very consistently pointed out, to potentially be an All-American. I mean, he just looks, he's so pretty, and that's a football term that I've stolen from coaches through the years, but he is such a pretty athlete out there. But how quickly do Bubakar and Botello round back into form? We know that they're ahead of track, both of them. We know they're going to be full clear by June, if not sooner. We know Bubakar has said he thinks he'll be able to start cutting loose full go in May. But for me, it's those two positions. Like I know there's secondary questions; they're legit, and you're still replacing a Jack Kaiser who erased so many mistakes before they ever happened on the field because of his command. But for me, it's the edge spot and it's the offensive line.
Look, we all understand what they lost from the defense, and so especially at safety, Drew, as you mentioned with Xavier Watts. But I think at least you feel good about the bodies that you have back there, especially now that we saw Tay Johnson flash. You know that you're going to get Strowman back from injury, so I feel pretty good. I mean, really, when I look across the entire defense, I feel pretty good about every position. Nothing's ever perfect, especially in the spring before you have everybody on your roster. Not only you got transfer. Not all the transfers are here, of course. So the main one, Malachi Fields, being on the offensive side. But so I mean, I look at the offensive side, and I think the answers are going to be there with the offensive line. Because Shrouth and Wagner and Craig's going to get there. Those guys are going to be fine. But what is the position where I'm just not sure they're going to have all the personnel that they're going to need when they have the entire roster. And for me, that's tight end. And that's why, I mean, I would put, I'm not sure how much I'd allow Eli Raridan to do on Saturday. He's got to come out of Saturday completely healthy. That is absolutely essential because, behind him you have Kevin Bauman, who's looking better than he has in years, but he still has a lot of wear and tear on him. Cooper Flanagan's coming off an Achilles, so you don't know exactly when he's going to be ready. I just have, not to make it personal, but I mean, Jack Larson, I haven't seen his get off at the line of scrimmage as something that is something that's going to get him in the lineup. Ty Washington's not here yet, the transfer from Arkansas. But even when he is, it's just not a real deep position. James Flanagan's coming soon this summer. I get all that, but to me, that's the one position where I say, do they really have enough personnel there? I'm not sure that I would say that really any other position on the team. How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you had some pretty fair points, especially like thinking about Ty Washington. Like he's a guy who was dismissed from Arkansas last season, so he
I
really
mean, he
much football stuff. So I think there's a lot of talent there, but he's a guy who's been away from playing football for some time now. So I definitely agree. I think now maybe this is wrong to say about Notre Dame in particular. Like if the tight end doesn't develop the way we want it to, I think Notre Dame could be okay. So maybe I think maybe it is the position that definitely needs the most work, but maybe isn't the ultimately most important is kind of how I looked at it. But I think you're right that it has the farthest to go.
What do you think about that, John? Tight end?
yeah. Tight end is the one where you worry the most about the depth. Now you're so much better at wide receiver, and Denbrock has talked in the past that he'd like to use some more multiple wide receiver sets and doesn't have to always be in a too tight set or won't use as much too tight depending on his personnel. And so it's still important because Notre Dame has carved a reputation as tight end U for a number of reasons. I mean, look how overall little that Brock Wright played here, and he's had a long running career and made some impact plays in the NFL. So you don't see that right now out of Notre Dame, and so I don't dismiss that. It's a very valid point. I just don't know that I would raise it to the level of concern for me as the offensive line and that edge spot. But
Yeah, no,
that's a
understand.
really good point.
Understandable. And look, they didn't plan on Cooper Flanagan with the Achilles. I get that, but I guess I'm a little biased toward the Pritchett family, as in Wes Pritchett's son, Marshall Pritchett, who would have crawled here to come to Notre Dame. And um, not only did he not have to settle, he went to Alabama for crying out loud. He apparently has had a really good spring. But I do want to say this, and I'm probably over talking about the tight end situation, but Ty Washington and Drew, the point that you make about being dismissed by Arkansas, his explanation coming out of that was that he had some mental health issues that weren't addressed, and so he's coming to the right place because we're talking about Jason Onye and all the positive things that have been said about him and the great things that Marcus Freeman said about the support that he had from his teammates, from staffing, all the way across the board. Ty Washington is coming to the right place to continue his college football career. We have a question from Irish Gambler. I find the linebackers fascinating because of their talent. What's the skill differentiator at each linebacker spot that makes the starter and the backup the backup?
I mean, I think I would start with I know you're maybe looking at like physical traits, but I think it's trust and knowing they can be in the right place at the right time and make the, right reads and hit the right gap and her sure tackle it. Like the basic things that is why I'm not confident, even though Jalen Sneed is kind of running with the starters now, like he still has more to prove in terms of being kind of assignment sound and making sure he does his job. Yeah, he can definitely make the explosive plays in the backfield, but sometimes it's like taking on this certain blocker or a certain offensive lineman just coming from a block and being able to like at least hold your spot and kind of redirect the play or something like that and do your job that way that I think is what's going to differentiate a starter from a rotation player there.
Yeah, you stole my very first keyword, Drew, and it's trust. And those coaches will not play you if they do not trust you, and that's a foundational tenet that's not changing in the transition from Al Golden to Chris Ash. He still has to trust that you know your assignment, that you're going to do 1/11th of what the defense is required to do on any given play, and that you're going to be where you're supposed to be, and all of those things. Then when you go to talent, there's not, in my opinion, a drastic difference in a lot of these guys. KVA is probably, along with Sneed, the two best suited right now at rushing the quarterback. Drake Bowen is that prototypical guy at the second level of your defense, in my opinion. Jay Nosberry is just so instinctive and has such great football intelligence as well as skills and on and on. You can go through the whole rotation like that. But again, to me, there's not a lot of talent differentiators that say, oh, well, they're playing that guy right here because of this. It comes down to trust, and then they'll nitpick the talent differences beyond that.
The fact that there isn't great differentiators speaks to why this is it's such a quality position for Notre Dame. I think when all is said and done, the two starters will be Drake Bowen and Kingston Viliamu Asa. Now now KVA, you can bring him off the edge. You can do the same thing with Sneed. So really, they're kind of interchangeable. But I think consistency wise, it's KVA and Bowen, and I don't think Notre Dame would anybody at Notre Dame would argue that. Now, we know how Max Bola feels about Jalen Sneed getting up to 235 pounds. Jay Nosbury played at what, 216 last year? I think that's what he was listed at when the season started. I'm sure he's a little bit bigger. I'd have to check the
I want to say
check.
he's up to
Is he up
225.
to 220? Well, that's good. I mean, that's good, but I think that may, yeah, especially in Bola's mind, since he's made such a big deal about Snead being 235 and how he's been on him to get up to that. He's probably been on Osbury about getting to that level too. But of course, Osbury was was working at some nickel, some nickel last year as well. So I'm not sure how much he's doing that now. But No, hey, it's a great position, man. Oh, and Preston Zinner. I think everybody likes Preston
Yeah.
Zinner, but was it Bulla or was it Ash that said he just needs to do a better job of finishing? So that would be a differentiator, but great position for Notre Dame, no doubt about that. Question from Dr. Parnell 42, another linebacker question. What would you deem a successful and productive season for freshman linebacker Madden Faremo?
I think he becomes a core teams guy for you that you can count on, and I think that he can be a guy that grows into a role as the season goes. Whether he's part of your second subset at the linebacker position or the third. But I think this year it's a little different than it was for KVA on just because KVA didn't have KVA in front of him, and Madden now has KVA in front of him. So I would look for him to be a starter on kickoff coverage, kickoff return, probably maybe something like punt coverage. We'll see. But a core teams guy who, over the course of the year, can carve some kind of role on the defensive side of the ball. He, of course, also is coming back from injury and has had the wrist injury, and that's impeded his progress. So he's got to get fully healthy, 100% healthy, and regain all of that strength that he lost in that arm while he had that injury and then come back. But he's a guy with the frame and the skill set that he could potentially have some sort of third down pass rush role for you, depending on how things shake out.
Yeah, to kind of add what you said too, I think KVA also is just so, I mean, I Madden Frame was also talented and impressive, but KVA's, I mean, he could play defense, man. He's legit 6'3", maybe even taller, 240 pounds, like, and he came like that as a freshman, like that, is kind of a pretty put together guy there. Whereas I think, yeah, kind of Framo, like if he plays 200, 250 snaps, kind of gets, 20 or so tackles, like kind of as you said, progresses into a role, like I think that would be successful. But I don't know that, unless injuries happen, him getting much more minutes than that is going to be pretty challenging.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we kind of stereotype and think that Fremo's going to come in and then make the immediate impact that Billy Amuasa did, and I don't think that will happen. And I mean, we have evidence. Tim O'Malley was talking about Framo and his hand, his wrist. I mean, he's still there's still an injury that he's dealing with there, so it's difficult to project right now. But I'm sure he's going to be a core special teams guy, as John said. And you know, hey, and I do want to say, I do want to add this. You guys may remember I asked a question last year of Marcus Freeman about KVA at defensive end, and I didn't mean moving to that position full time. I just meant, as a pass rusher. Well, as it turned out, that's exactly what he became, a pass rusher off the edge. And he could be a defensive end. And I did that wasn't why I was actually asking the question. But Drew, I agree with you. I think that he possibly could, but he's got a great future ahead of him at the linebacker position. I think we've been remiss. I've been remiss here because we haven't talked about the quarterbacks yet. We'll obviously be talking a lot about them post blue gold game on Saturday, but we do have a question from PG Dumont, and that is, do you expect any separation among the quarterbacks after Saturday? For example, will there be a clear number one or clear number three? Which quarterback is most likely to hit the transfer portal next week?
Yeah, and real quickly, last thing I would say on the linebacker question was KVA actually told me that he lost a little bit of weight and feels better because of it. He's listed at 231. I think he told me maybe be around 235 by the time the season rolls around. He was listed at 6'3", 240 last year. So again, 6'3", 231. And we saw that explosiveness, and we saw incredible bend last Saturday in the open practice. He didn't get home to the quarterback and he ended up slipping a little bit, but his bend to get underneath the right tackle that was trying to block him, was pretty phenomenal last week. So again, just a really his instincts are matched with incredible talent, and we don't always see it that way. At the quarterback position, I'm not ducking the question. I think Notre Dame very obviously is doing everything in its power to try and keep the three quarterbacks here as long as they can. I don't see any scenario where Marcus Freeman names a starting quarterback after Saturday's spring game, especially knowing that Notre Dame still has a couple of more practice dates left on its calendar post the spring game to finish out its full allotment of 15. The portal opens on Wednesday. If I had to pick one guy that I thought was most likely, I guess I would say Steve Angeli. If they didn't tell him that he would be the starter and he said, if I'm going to spend my last year here, I have to know that I'm going to be the starter. And if they said it that way, if he said it that way and they said, we can't tell you that right now, you might be, then I guess I would rate him as the most likely. But again, I know Notre Dame is trying every way that it can to keep all three.
Yeah, I think it's more likely we see a I guess I'm trying to think back to 2023 when it was Hartman versus Buckner. And I thought in a lot of the practices we saw before the Blue Gold game, in part because there's a lot more pressure and Buckner is more agile, I thought he at times looked a little better than Hartman. And then he came out and had an atrocious Blue Gold game. And I think that kind of confirmed his decision to look elsewhere and enter the portal. So maybe if somebody has a really bad performance and they kind of know that's how the fan base sees him. If you're Steve Angeli, you've usually had the fan base's support. If they start, I don't know, if he gets less favorable, maybe that prompts somebody to look elsewhere or move on. But um, other than I don't think it will be CJ Carr hitting the transfer portal, I don't have a opinion on which of those other two would be more likely.
If there is a clear number one coming out of Saturday, Notre Dame's not going to say it. Certainly, they're not in a position to do that. And John, I want to address the fact that there will be practices after the Blue Gold game, which now tells us why on April 23rd, what day of the week is that? That's in a couple
Wednesday, that's
Wednesdays. Yeah.
13
We're
days.
gonna we're going to meet with Marcus Freeman again. So that was an indicator to me that, and this was something that Pete Sampson had said, maybe they would have practices after the Blue Gold game. How many? Do you know how many, JB? I mean, I don't. There was nine through Saturday, last Saturday, so that left six, with the Blue Gold game being one of them.
I think
Maybe
it's
two.
two.
Is it two? I
Yeah,
think
I
it's
think
two.
it's
Yeah.
two.
And it's probably, well, I don't want to speculate beyond that because it's new territory for us. But I had heard two, and the fact that Freeman has that presser a little bit later, because if to go into the summer months, he has to have the latest update to provide the media. So yeah. Now, who would leave? I hate to speculate about that, but the guy that would, I mean, if he had to pick one of the three, I guess it would probably be Angeli, because the clock is really ticking for him, and he wants to play. He wants to be the starting quarterback of Notre Dame, and I think it's commendable he's hung in with Notre Dame like he has. But I guess if I had to pick one, it would be him. We are down to two questions, one of which is from Chubby Squirrel. No further comment there. Last year we had two players we couldn't afford to lose, and Riley Leonard and Xavier Watts. If you had to choose two players this year, who could Notre Dame least afford to lose from the current squad?
I would probably say Jeremiah Love because he is a singular player. He is a top 10 player, top 5 player probably anywhere in college football. He's a certified pro. Um, as we see running backs start to creep back into all the mock draft projections for later this month in the NFL, including an Ashton Genty and Omarion Hampton from North Carolina. We know that now if teams are willing to reinvest first round picks on running backs, I don't know anybody who wouldn't have Jeremiah Love as a potential first running back drafted in 26. So he is my number one player on offense. And I guess on defense, I probably I probably would lean toward a Don Schuler. I probably would go those two. So still a skill player on offense and a safety on defense. I could entertain an argument for a Gabriel Rubio because Notre Dame has to be stout along its defensive interior. And I just think he played with such great stature last year and is really just like lumberjack strong. And then, you can make a couple of arguments for some other players on offense. But for me, it's those two.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to go, especially if they're able to keep these three quarterbacks over the summer. It's hard to go anywhere other than Jeremiah Love. I agree. I mean, I think he would be, he obviously doesn't have the production of an Ashton Genty, but I think you would argue he's a more talented running back at the, especially when you project to the professional level. And we've seen how much effort he's putting into expanding his game to, running more in different routes and maybe being on the field more often without taking quite the beating he would have to get those extra snaps. So I think he's a guy they can really design their offense around and be that kind of supreme talent. On defense, I feel a little silly saying this because he only takes away a part of the field, but I kind of feel like Leonard Moore, if he can really just kind of erase everyone's best receiver and kind of prove to be even more of a playmaker than he was last year, even though he led the team in passes defended. But if he can, pick off some more passes and kind of have that ascension, I think with some of the weight he's added, um, changes he's trying to make in terms of being even better at covering slants and taking away the middle of the field and things like that, that I think you could have a guy who just makes it easier for everybody else because he has this area locked down and kind of makes some plays that set up the offense well.
Boy, hard not to pick Jeremiah Love. But look, we know Jadarian Price is a quality running back, and they've got good backs behind them. But he's at a level. Melly and I are always talking about where he ranks among the greatest in Notre Dame history of running back, and we've seen a whole bunch of them, and he is right up there, if not at the top. I'd go back to tight end. It's imperative that Eli Raritan comes out of Saturday completely healthy. If I had to pick another, I think it's easier to pick defensive guys for something like this. I'd say Malachi Fields. I know we haven't seen him, but we know his track record. We know what he's capable of doing. And that's the W position where, I just think that he's a clear standout there. You're still hoping for Cam Williams to develop at that position, and then, Micah Gilbert, who hasn't had much of a spring. So those are the offensive players that I would mention. Defense, it's more extensive. I love where you're coming from, JB, with regards to Gabe Rubio. Um, I think that I would agree with you on a Don Schuler. I think a Don Schuler has really become the leader of that back end of the defense, certainly at the safety position. Leonard Moore has to be mentioned. I know I'm going beyond the limitations, but these are extremely key people, and really Devontae Smith, because I'm not sure what you do at nickel. You're probably going to have to go really, really young at nickel if you don't have Devontae Smith. So
Yeah.
most of mine are on defense, I think, as you guys are as well. But how do you not pick Jeremiah Love? He's absolutely sensational.
I would cheat a little bit as well there. And good point on Devontae Smith. Carson Hobbs, we like. We saw some stuff out of
Mhm.
Carson Hobbs and got a great frame. So I wouldn't quite worry. As Notre Dame is not as bereft of depth at nickel as it has been in some recent years. One we didn't talk about, probably have done a pretty lousy job all spring of not talking about enough. I would say if Noah Burnett regains his 2023 All ACC form, he would be third probably of guys I would say Notre Dame could least afford to lose because Notre Dame has a tougher road schedule. We know that it took Mitch Jeter kicking the field goal to seal the win at Texas A&M to start the season. It took Mitch Jeter kicking the field goal to clinch the win against Penn State. So Noah Burnett is no joke. Very high on my list of people that Notre Dame could ill afford to lose because I think Notre Dame will be in some fairly close games, and you have to have a place kicker that you trust.
I'm glad you brought him up because the guy that and people have pointed out, we've just kind of pushed him aside because he hasn't arrived yet. But Eric Schmidt, the incoming freshman, who was verbally committed to Wisconsin at one point, um, he is coming in as true freshman. Your point taken about Noah Burnett, who's been through the wars, JB, but you do have that other option there as well.
Yeah, and I bet Schmidt wins the kickoff job for Notre Dame in the
Yeah,
fall. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, we're going to wrap up for a question from Irish Boy One. Would this team outperform the 2024 team if it played last year's schedule?
Go ahead, Drew.
Um, I mean, I feel like I feel like I could see, especially depending on how the quarterback play works out, like this team being
That's key.
talented than last year's, but it's so you knew at least there was a bare minimum you were getting from Riley Leonard in terms of consistency. Um, so it's kind of hard to project, and you're also for them to outperform, like you would assume this team would beat Northern Illinois. Um, and then so it's like, would they be able to come out of the gate and beat Texas A&M to open the season on the road with a new starting quarterback? I think that's kind of the where you'd really need to evaluate if we're talking specifically like the regular season. But I think um, the biggest issue is some of the, as we just touched on, some of the most important positions on the offense and the defense. Like we don't know that we have that trust in certain players there, even if we could see them being more talented in certain ways.
Yeah, will Notre Dame have a quarterback this year that could have defeated Georgia and Penn State last year or last season? I'm not sure about that. We don't know. And by that point, Riley Leonard was, arguably the MVP of the entire football team. So it's a good question, one that doesn't ultimately, when all is said and done, doesn't really matter because you've got the 2025 team, and here you go. But yeah,
Yeah, I think you could.
you certainly would have liked last year's team's chances against the 2025 schedule.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. I think you can look at this 25 team, and I think this 25 team, you'll see it, especially in the fall with all the pieces, and you'll probably look at it and say it's more talented than the 24 team. I really believe that. I think you will look at it. I think outperforming what the 24 team did would be incredibly hard, even for a more talented team, because so many guys fit such needed roles and they willfully fit those roles. And Riley Leonard, of course, is a perfect example of that. But there were other guys like Jadarian Price who knew that he was going to be the number two and that he would have to step up when Jeremiah Love was dinged up, and he did that. And we knew that there were undersized guys on the defensive interior that had to play a lot more, especially when Howard Cross went down for a significant swath of the season. Um, and so there are just so many of those things. I do think the 25 team is more talented, would not lose to Northern Illinois, would probably still lose one other game. So maybe would they outperform? They might outperform in the sense that maybe they would have been the sixth seed instead of the seventh seed. And then the last thing has nothing to do with the question, but on the message board, DMs, everything, people have checked on my mom. I appreciate that. She had a very severe stroke, had to be airlifted for emergency procedure on her brain in the Tri-Cities. She then had a second stroke and an additional setback at the end of this week after this all happened almost exactly this time a week ago. We do have some encouragement. We do have some hope for a close to full recovery for my mom. Thanks to everyone.
God bless. God bless, JB. We're going to wrap up there. We will have be prepared for a whole bunch of coverage on Saturday, pregame and postgame, per usual. Video, the written word, the spoken word, a little bit of everything as Notre Dame. At least the viewing part for the media and the fans wraps up on Saturday. Until then, I'm Tim Priester with John Bryce and Drew Mentok, and this has been Irish Illustrated Insider.